I'm a mother of three, and my husband, Greg, 60M, and I both come from families that have been wealthy for generations. Our families have had significant fortunes for over a century. When we first met as teenagers, we quickly realized we had a lot in common. We were both only children, and we both found the lifestyle we grew up in to be pretentious and, frankly, a little embarrassing. Even though we didn't start dating until our early 20s, when we did, it was definitely for love. Our parents passed away over a span of 10 years when we were in our late 20s and early 30s. As the sole heirs to two prominent families, we inherited a massive fortune, making us incredibly wealthy. On top of that, Greg has done an excellent job managing our estates, investments, and businesses for the last 3 decades. I've never been one to just sit around sipping tea and looking pretty, so I dove into the real estate market. I'll admit, it's easier to do when you already have a lot of disposable income. Now, I own several properties along the West Coast that turn a nice profit. We made a point of teaching our 3 kids the value of hard work. Long before we got married, Greg and I agreed that just because we had money didn't mean we should be useless. Naturally, our children were incredibly privileged, just like we were. But we did everything we could to make sure their childhood wasn't too far from the norm. They had chores, and once they were old enough, they had to get jobs. Sure, they had new cars and went to prestigious private schools, but we were determined they wouldn't turn into the helpless people we grew up with. And by friends, I mean people we air-quoted when we said the word growing up. A lot of them were completely dependent on their parents, and now as adults, many are even worse off. Our oldest son, Ben, 33M, has made a successful career as a lawyer. He's been married to his longtime girlfriend, Jenna, for about 4 years. Our middle child and only daughter, Hannah, 30F, is still single but dedicates herself to various philanthropic causes that we are really proud of. Now, my youngest son, Jason, 27M, is the reason I'm writing this. 7 years ago, he met his now wife, Sarah, 27F, while he was in college. Together, they've given us our only grandchild, Liam, 2M. Unlike his older siblings, who chose traditional Ivy League schools, Jason decided to go to San Diego State University. That was totally fine with us. It was his choice. He's always marched to the beat of his own drum, and he's different from the other two. They seem to embrace the expectations placed on them. They fit perfectly into the mold of wealthy, high-society kids. Jason, on the other hand, didn't. He was more introverted, but always confident in himself. I remember when he was little, he hardly ever cried. No matter what. Growing up, he was often the center of attention, though he never needed it. I always thought he was equally happy hanging out with his 10 closest friends or spending a week completely alone. Jason ended up going into tech, and he's now working as a software developer. With the millions in his trust fund, he's never had to worry about money, but I've always admired that he lives life on his terms and doesn't conform to what's expected of someone with his background. As for Sarah, despite being from a more normal background, she's fit into our family beautifully. I've always said Jason hit the jackpot with her. She's kind, charming, and seems to adore Jason. They share so many common interests, and she's stunning, too. When she's with our family, she's never out of place. She takes a genuine interest in everything we do, and she's always eager to be part of whatever we have planned. She's even mastered society events quickly, which is impressive considering she didn't grow up in that environment. Our grandson is the sweetest little boy, and I love him to pieces. All of this is what makes the news I recently received so painful. A friend of mine, who I hadn't seen in person for a few years, came to visit me recently. It was great catching up, especially since the last time I saw her was almost 4 years ago, shortly after she divorced her husband of 34 years. At the time, we didn't get into the details, but I knew she had discovered her husband was a frequent client of an escort service. During her visit, we mostly talked about our current lives, but toward the end, the conversation shifted back to her ex-husband. She was still clearly bitter about it, and as she spoke, her tone became more melancholic. She admitted it had been hard on her because she knew she could never compare to the women he had been paying for. She had even found photos of some of them on his computer. Then, she pulled out her phone, with tears welling up in her eyes, and showed me some of the pictures. They were like advertisements, the images that the escort service would send to clients. She scrolled through a few, holding her phone where I could see. Honestly, I didn't want to look, as she vented, saying, "How was I supposed to compete with that?" I was focused on comforting her, partly because I knew how hard this must be, but also because I knew she'd feel embarrassed for being so emotional. That is, until I noticed the tattoo. I stopped her scrolling. She had only shown me 3 or 4 pictures at that point. But in one of them, the girl looked exactly like Sarah, at least, how Sarah looked when she was 20 or 21. That would have been around the time she and Jason started dating, maybe during their first year together. I could have chalked it up to coincidence. Maybe they just looked alike. But in the picture, you could barely make out a Bulbasaur tattoo on the girl's inner bicep, the same tattoo Sarah has. I'm sure it's her. I don't want to ruin my son's marriage, and maybe Jason already knows about this part of her past. I've promised myself I wouldn't become judgmental or turn into one of those people. But this photo could be from when they were dating, and I feel like Jason has a right to know. I don't want him to be blindsided if this ever comes out later. I think the best thing I can do is a little digging. Find out if this is really in her past, how far back it goes, and how involved she was. Then, I can approach Jason with all the facts. Since I started digging into my son's marriage, I've uncovered some truly unsettling information. I feel guilty for prying, but what began as a simple effort to confirm whether or not my daughter-in-law, Sarah, had ever been involved in escort work has spiraled into something much bigger than I anticipated. I even went so far as to hire a private investigator to find out if Sarah was still involved in that kind of work. The investigator followed her for 2 weeks and reported back that she didn't meet with any other men or women during that time. Apart from a girlfriend she had lunch with a couple of times. There was nothing out of the ordinary, but the investigator seemed convinced there would be. He told me that on the very first night, he went to observe their house. He said he was just gathering intel when he saw Sarah walk out the door with my grandson, Liam. She got into her car and drove to a very nice townhouse in an upscale part of the city. The investigator claimed he was sure she was going there to meet some older, married man. He's seen similar situations play out countless times before. For 2 whole days, he watched as Sarah and Liam stayed at the townhouse. No one else came or went from the place, except for the 2 of them. They went to a park to play, and they got takeout twice. He was adamant no one else was around. In the 2 weeks he observed her, she spent 8 nights at this townhouse, including every Monday. Naturally, this raised red flags for me, so I did some digging into this residence. Turns out, Sarah owns the place. It's in her name alone. This got me pretty worked up, as I started wondering if she and Jason were having marital problems. But the timeline didn't add up because Sarah bought this place 4 years ago, just 1 year after they got married and 2 years before Liam was born. That brought me to another glaring issue. They aren't legally married. Now, I was at their wedding. It was a grand, expensive affair, and they signed a prenup before the ceremony. The only odd thing was that, instead of having the family lawyer handle it, Jason insisted on hiring an old high school buddy of his who had recently started practicing law. Jason said it would be a huge boost for his friend to have a high-profile client, so we didn't argue. Our legal team looked over the prenup, and everything seemed standard. But how could they not be married? My investigator found that it looked like they never even filed the paperwork. I mean, if they didn't want to be legally married, that would have been fine. We're not a religious family, and nobody would have judged them. At least nobody who mattered. So why all the secrecy? This only pushed me to dig deeper. I hired some people who are good at uncovering things. It's not the first time I've done this, and I have the resources. It might not be entirely legal, but these folks are discreet and professional. They managed to get Damien's financial records. I already had access to the ones related to the family estate, but they got his personal records, along with Sarah's tax and income statements. What I found there was puzzling. According to her taxes, Sarah has made around $400,000 each of the last 3 years. She's a stay-at-home mom. On her tax forms, she's listed as a self-employed interior designer. Funny enough, I've never once heard her mention anything about being an interior designer. To top it off, the records showed 3 large money transfers over the past 6 years. 2 for $750,000 and 1 for $500,000. The money went from Jason's trust to their joint account, and then from there into Sarah's personal account. At this point, I had enough to bring everything to my husband, Greg. He's always been the level-headed one, and I figured he'd know what to do. To my surprise, he told me to drop it. He even raised his voice a bit, which really caught me off guard. He said, "Just leave it alone. What they do with their money and in their personal lives is their business. They're happy, we're happy, and there's no reason to stir things up." I'll admit, I didn't handle it well. I pushed back because I knew he was hiding something from me. We argued a bit more before I stormed off. Feeling upset, I made a rash decision to drive over to Jason and Sarah's house, determined to confront them. Their home is nice, big but not over the top. I let myself in through the side door, which, looking back, was a mistake. They didn't hear me come in. When I stepped into the living room, I was met with quite the scene. Sarah was completely naked, cleaning the house, while Jason sat on the couch watching her, clearly enjoying himself. I screamed, "Oh my God!" They both panicked. Jason jumped up, trying to cover himself, while Sarah turned to leave the room. In a flustered voice, she asked Jason, "Should I cover up?" He quickly replied, "Yes, please, baby." Jason was understandably upset with me, and things got tense until Sarah returned wearing a robe. She smoothed things over with a joke about putting up a sign that says, "Roleplay in progress." I was too mortified to say anything about what I'd learned. It wasn't until hours later that the whole situation started to gnaw at me. I don't care if they're being kinky. I'm 57, and I've had my share of fun, so it's whatever. I just wish I hadn't walked in on it. What bothers me is what Sarah said right after I came in. Why did she feel the need to ask him if she should cover up? That's common sense, isn't it? What kind of dynamic do they have where she would need to ask that in such a situation? Now, I'm torn between what Greg said and what my instincts are telling me to do. I tried to bring it up again with him, but he was firm. He said, "Jason confided in me. He asked me not to tell you, to spare your feelings. Just like Darcy has trusted you with things over the years, especially when she was younger. I never pressured you to betray her trust, and now I'm asking you to do the same for me on this. I'll honor his request, and I won't press him on this anymore. But that doesn't mean I'm done. I'm going to get the truth from my son." It took me a couple of weeks to finally get some time alone with my son, Jason, to ask him about what was really going on between him and Sarah. And I've got to say, my husband was right. I should have left it alone. I had to prod a bit, showing Jason all the evidence I'd gathered. At first, he thought his father, Greg, had let something slip, but I assured him that wasn't the case. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Eventually, he came clean about everything. Sarah wasn't a former escort, which gave me a brief sense of relief. But that relief was short-lived. She's not a former escort because she's a current one, and she's his escort. Their entire relationship is, quite literally, a business transaction. Jason pays her $177.15 an hour. That $500,000 transfer? It was a wedding bonus. And my grandson, Liam? Jason paid $750,000 for her to have him 3 years ago. Now, he wants a second child, and the most recent $750,000 payment is for that. I must have looked completely dumbfounded as Jason explained all of this to me. It just seemed too absurd to be real, but at the same time, it all clicked. Her tax filings, her townhouse, the fact that she doesn't spend all her nights at their home, it all started to make sense. She's off the clock during those times. I asked him so many questions about their arrangement, and surprisingly, Jason didn't hold back. Apparently, if Sarah is with him or at their house, she's on the clock. Anytime she's interacting with any part of our extended family, she's being paid. Anytime she's pretending to be part of our family, she's working. She's allowed to keep any gifts she receives from anyone, and they maintain the appearance that they all live at their house full-time. Food she likes are kept on hand, and her personal hygiene products are there too, but beyond that, she spends less than half her time there. During the hours she's working, Jason has full access to her, but they set up a schedule every 2 weeks for overnight stays. If he wants her to stay an extra night, he can ask, but she can refuse. All of this is just the regular, everyday part of the arrangement. Family vacations, gatherings, and special events are assumed to be part of her working hours unless they come up on short notice. When it comes to Liam, both Jason and Sarah see him as their child. They consider themselves co-parents and love him deeply. Sarah has primary custody and spends almost all her time with him. They also have a nanny to help when needed, like when they're both busy or when Sarah needs a break. Jason reassured me that Sarah genuinely loves Liam and would never give up custody. As strange as it sounds, I actually believe him. Everything I've seen suggests she's a wonderful mother. I asked what would happen if their arrangement ever ended, and Jason simply said, "We'd co-parent, like amicably divorced parents who stay friends." Neither of us wants Liam to grow up without both of his parents. There's so much more to it, but I didn't pry too much into the personal aspects of their relationship. It was uncomfortable for both of us. Still, I had to ask the billion-dollar question. Why? It all started back in Jason's junior year of college. He was always popular, even though he kept to himself a lot. When you're rich and good-looking, attention tends to find you. He told me that despite what most people thought, he did want to be with someone special, but every time he had a girlfriend, it eventually became clear they were more interested in what he could give them than in him as a person. And when you come from money like we do, that's always a possibility. Then, a friend introduced him to the escort service. They were very discreet, and that's how he met Sarah. She offered something called a girlfriend experience. I guess, typically, escorts have a lot of boundaries about what they will and won't do, but the girlfriend experience blurs those lines. It's more like a real relationship. Unprotected sex, kissing, deep conversations, and the like. I regretted asking for details, but I did ask if they got tested before starting, and he assured me they both did. After about a month of this arrangement, Jason found himself enjoying it more than he expected. That's when he made Sarah an offer. He wanted to turn their girlfriend experience into her full-time job. They agreed on $100 an hour back then. With the rate increasing each year, they kept the arrangement going. Jason provided for all her necessities and accommodations while they were together. She made herself available as much as possible and attended family functions, work events, and so on. He said Sarah was very professional, and she put in real effort to learn how to navigate the social circles we move in. When I asked him about the bigger life events, like getting married and having kids, he simply said he wanted those things, and Sarah was willing to provide them for the right price. He knows they aren't legally married, but he said he got the wedding he always wanted, and it was special to him because, for once, he got to be the first one to hit a major milestone. Jason genuinely seems to like their relationship. He said, "It's amazing. Everyone gets what they want. I got the marriage I wanted without any of the drama or stress, and she's the perfect partner every hour of every day. Sarah has been part of our lives for 7 years, and I can't believe that the entire time, it was just her job. Now, I'm about to have a real conversation with her about all of this." Jason told her that I know what's going on. I'm hoping that, in this conversation, I'll finally see the real Sarah, not just the perfect daughter-in-law act she's been playing all these years. I recently sat down with Sarah, and while I wouldn't say I feel completely at peace with everything, I do feel a bit better. Not by much, but it is what it is. We met at a nice bistro in the city, with the nanny taking care of Liam. Honestly, I didn't even know where to begin, so I told her that. She responded, "You can start wherever you want, Jeri. Jason's paying me for this and instructed me to answer all your questions honestly." The way she said it gave me a sick feeling, like we were sitting down for a business negotiation or an interrogation. I dove in, asking, "Do you love my son? Do you even like him? Or is it really just all business? I'm having a hard time accepting that it's purely transactional between you two." She replied, "I do like him. He's a sweet guy, and honestly, he's funny too. After 7 years, he's still really respectful toward me. Our arrangement lets him do whatever he wants, technically, but he always checks in to make sure I'm comfortable. That's something I appreciate." I had this weird mix of emotions, discomfort from discussing their intimate life, but also a strange sense of pride that my son still respected boundaries and believed in consent. It was a strange moment. Sarah continued, "I do keep my distance, though, because it's a business deal. He pays me to be what he wants, and I provide that. I make sure I don't get too attached. That's one of the reasons I have my own place. Years ago, he offered to cover an apartment for me when I wasn't working, but I said no. It would still feel like his space. The townhouse is mine." "So, no real emotions? Just co-workers then?" I asked. Sarah replied, "Not exactly. It's more like close work friends. He wants the girlfriend experience, but without any of the tough parts of a real relationship. I give him that, and sometimes it means I have to be emotionally vulnerable. It's actually nice when he comforts me during those moments. He shares his feelings with me too, and I try to empathize and help him. We almost always cuddle afterward, and I'll admit, I do enjoy that. But what about you? Don't you want love, a life of your own? And that woman we met, is she really your mother? Or was that an actress? You've made a fortune already. You don't need to keep doing this. Why not find your own happiness? I asked, genuinely curious. She paused and said, I am happy. I'm grateful for everything I've got. No, I won't do this forever. But for now, it's been good. That really is my mom. She raised me as a single parent, worked hard to take care of me, and she knows everything. She thinks Jason is great and keeps hoping things between us will turn into something real. I cut in. And she's okay with this? She doesn't like it, Sarah admitted. But she understands. We were really poor growing up, though I didn't know it at the time. When I was 11, I caught my mom doing something I wasn't supposed to see. I didn't bring it up until I was 15, and when I did, she didn't freak out. She just told me the truth. She was webcam modeling to make ends meet. Every day, she'd wake up at 6, help me get ready, go to her regular job, take care of me when she got home, sleep a couple of hours, then get up at midnight to webcam until 2 or 3 in the morning. She did that for years. After I graduated high school, I took out loans and went to college, but it was really tough. One day, I saw an ad offering $1,500 to $2,000 for 3 hours of work. It turned out to be for adult films. I ended up doing it, but they ripped me off. They handed me an envelope with $200 in it and left. I felt stupid for not reading the fine print. The contract said up to $1,500 in compensation. I must have had an uneasy look on my face because I asked, "There's a film of you out there?" With a sad tone, Sarah replied, "Yes. I haven't found it online, but I'm sure it's out there somewhere." I used a fake name and didn't have any tattoos at the time. Plus, I was barely 18 and probably looked even younger. It was a small, sleazy studio, so I doubt many people have seen it. But still, I'm really ashamed of it. She got teary-eyed. So I reached out, took her hand, and told her it was okay. She didn't have to share anything she didn't want to. But she shook her head and continued, "No, it's fine." After that experience, I was still struggling. A friend introduced me to the escort agency. She was doing it and knew I needed the money. The agency was legit, discreet, and professional. I only had 2 clients before I met Jason. Both were much older, and it was pretty gross, but the money was good. Jason was different. He was my age, and he wanted more than just a quick fling. Oh my God, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be so blunt. It's okay, go ahead, I reassured her. Well, he liked me, and I felt safer with him, so I offered the girlfriend experience. He was really into that. After about a month of seeing each other a few nights a week, he made his move, she laughed. He offered me a deal I couldn't believe, basically becoming his full-time, paid girlfriend. Did you keep seeing other clients? I asked. Oh no, she said firmly. From the moment Jason first hired me, I've been exclusive to him. Early on, he was booking me 3 or 4 times a week, mostly for that housekeeping fantasy of his. Oh God, I'm sorry, that's TMI. I winced a little, but told her, it's okay. And the rest is history? Yeah, pretty much. I'm sorry about all of this. Neither of us wanted to hurt anyone. I know finding out about the wedding and the true nature of our relationship must be a lot, she said. Trying to be as calm and reassuring as possible, I responded, it is a lot, but I'm doing my best to keep an open mind. Part of me wants to lash out, but I know that won't help anyone. But you still haven't answered my question. What do you want for your life? I'll probably only keep doing this for a few more years, Sarah admitted. I'd like to meet someone to grow old with. I don't date. I stay faithful to our arrangement. I don't know what the future holds for Jason and me. We'll always be in each other's lives because of Liam, but I don't know if he'll ever want more than what we have now. That's fair, I said. I won't give my opinion, since I've already butted into your lives enough. But before we wrap this up, is there anything else you'd like to share? Sarah paused for a moment, then said, I'm not really a horse person. I didn't know anything about horses until Jason told me you like them. I studied them because I'm supposed to make you all like me. I do enjoy the shows you take me to, though. That part's real. I smirked, amused. Then she added, also, I really don't like onions. Your family puts them in everything. I don't mention it because I'm supposed to be pleasant all the time, but I really can't stand onions. I made a mental note of that. Anything else? I asked, thinking she might add one more silly confession. She took a deep breath and said, yes, I'm pregnant. As I left the bistro, Sarah's words swirled around in my head. I couldn't shake her final confession. Pregnant? A new grandchild. After everything I had uncovered, it didn't feel like the joyous news it should have been. It felt complicated, layered in shadows. Was this pregnancy just another transaction? Had Jason paid for this child too, just like Liam? I drove home in silence, the weight of my thoughts growing heavier with every passing mile. I had expected to confront Sarah, but what I learned left me even more uncertain. I wasn't sure if I felt relief or more deeply unsettled. This was not the life I had envisioned for my son, nor for myself. When I arrived home, Greg was in the study, as usual, sipping on his evening whiskey. He barely looked up as I walked in, but I knew he sensed my unease. The house felt cold and empty, the walls suddenly too tall, too distant. How'd it go? He finally asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass without meeting my eyes. I hesitated. She told me everything. Greg didn't respond at first. His lack of surprise, his steady, calm demeanor, it all unnerved me. I stood there, waiting for him to probe, to ask what I had learned, but he simply took another sip, his gaze fixed on the fireplace as if he already knew the answers. Sarah's pregnant, I said, hoping for some kind of reaction, some spark of emotion, but Greg barely blinked. That's so, he muttered. The flatness of his response gnawed at me. That's all you have to say? I asked, my voice rising with frustration. She's carrying our second grandchild, and you act like it's no big deal. Greg sighed, setting down his glass, finally looking up at me. Jeri, you need to stop digging into this. I need to stop? I snapped, the anger bubbling up. After everything I've uncovered, you still think I should leave it alone? Yes, he said firmly, standing up and walking to the window. It's not your business. What Jason and Sarah have, it works for them. It works for them? I scoffed. He's paying his wife to be his escort, Greg. She's pregnant, and I don't even know if it's part of their sick deal. He turned, his eyes narrowing in a way I'd never seen before. Jeri, it's time you knew the truth. A chill ran down my spine. What truth? Greg took a deep breath, leaning against the window ledge. Jason didn't come up with this arrangement on his own, he said quietly, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. He learned it from me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. What are you talking about? He wouldn't look at me. Your mother, my marriage to her wasn't what you think it was. She wasn't my girlfriend, at least not at first. I stared at him, completely confused. What does that mean? Greg rubbed his temples, as if trying to gather the courage to continue. I met her through an arrangement, Jeri. She was my paid companion before she became my wife. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. What? No, that can't be. It's true, he said, cutting me off. Back then, it wasn't uncommon in families like ours. Wealth, legacy, power. It complicates things. Love isn't always part of the equation, but compatibility is. My father made similar arrangements, and I was advised to do the same. I took a step back, suddenly feeling dizzy. So you're telling me, my mother was paid to be with you? At first, yes, Greg admitted. But over time, things changed. We grew close. We built a real relationship. But it didn't start that way. I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I knew about my parents, my childhood, was unraveling before my eyes. And you let Jason do the same thing? I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. I didn't let him do anything, Greg said. He made his own choices. But when he told me what he was planning with Sarah, I didn't stop him because I understood. He wasn't looking for love. He was looking for control, for stability. He wanted a relationship without the fear that someone would be after his money. I shook my head. But this isn't stability, Greg. This is a business deal. What happens when it falls apart? What happens to Liam? And now there's another baby on the way? That's why I told you to leave it alone, Greg said, his voice firm but not unkind. They found a way to make it work. It may not be conventional, but they're happy. Happy? I whispered, more to myself than to him. How can you say that? Greg came closer, his eyes softening. Jeri, I've kept this secret for years because I didn't want you to see the world this way. I wanted to protect you from the truth about our family, about how things have always been. I stepped back, my mind reeling. So what now? I asked, tears threatening to spill over. What do I do with this? Greg sighed. You do what I did. You accept it, because fighting it won't change anything. But I couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept that Jason's life, his marriage, was just an echo of a dark family tradition. The days passed, and I tried to push down my anger, my confusion, but it gnawed at me, keeping me awake at night. I had to confront Jason one more time. I had to know if this was truly what he wanted. One evening, I asked Jason to meet me at the house. I sat him down in the study, the same room where Greg had dropped the bombshell. Jason, I began, trying to steady my voice. I know about your arrangement with Sarah. He didn't flinch. I figured you would. I shook my head in disbelief. Is this really what you want? A life where everything is a transaction? Jason looked at me, his eyes filled with an unsettling calm. Mom, this is what works for me. Sarah and I have an understanding. It's not perfect, but it's ours. And the baby? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Is this part of your arrangement too? Jason's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something real, something vulnerable. No, he said. The baby wasn't part of the deal. Sarah. She came to me a few weeks ago and told me she was pregnant. We hadn't planned for it. My heart skipped a beat. So, it wasn't paid for? Jason shook his head. No, it wasn't. And I think that's what scares me the most. I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. For the first time in years, something's happening that's not under my control, Jason said, his voice trembling slightly. I don't know what this means for us, for me and Sarah, but I think I'm starting to realize that I want more. More? I asked, confused. I want to be a real father, Jason said, his eyes brimming with uncertainty. I want this baby to have something more than just a business deal for parents. Tears welled up in my eyes as I saw the cracks in the facade Jason had built so carefully. For the first time, I felt like I was really seeing my son. Beneath all the wealth, the control, the legacy. And maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something real after all.